shall we get started? What do you think?
Sure.
It looks like
Yeah.
already quite a few people who have joined us.
Sure.
That's great.
Let's go ahead.
So first of all, I would like to say welcome everyone to our first presentation of this 2020-21 RELL research presentation series. Our presenter, our speaker today is Professor Nicolas Urbina, who is, I'm assuming that everyone knows Professor Urbina, but he's a professor of Latin American literature in our Department of Romance and Arabic Languages and Literatures at UC. He has started seminars on a very wide range of topics on the Latin American novel, the short story, Central American culture, creative writing, as well as more kind of thematically based courses such as humor, myth and violence, and Spanish American literature. This semester, he's also teaching a Taft research seminar on Andean literatures and cultures. He has published multiple books. I don't know how many you have right now, Nicasio. I think I read 10, but you're probably over that number in the double digits now.
Mm-hmm.
He has published multiple books and articles of literary criticism, short stories, and poetry. He has also edited many books on different topics. And I want to mention also that in 2015, Professor Urbina received the Rivershell Award for Creative and Scholarly Work, which, as you know, is pretty much the most prestigious award at UC for research and creative writing. I read online, Nicasio, that you consider writing, and I quote, to be a reflexive and personal exercise that can have universal implications and fundamental teachings, and that for you, literature is the best ambassador amongst peoples, helping to their mutual understanding and peaceful coexistence. So I don't know if your views have changed, but...
No, they have not.
Okay, good. And finally, I also want to mention that, especially within the last few years, Professor Urbina has been publishing many articles of lyric criticism, creative writing, and newspaper articles dealing with kind of very complex political issues in Nicaragua. So he's also been actively involved in the kind of arena of political debate and involvement around these issues. Today, the title of his presentation is Authorial Intention in Marius Vargas Llosa's Hard Times. And so, Nicasio, please, let's welcome, even if he's a colleague and our professor, maybe we can have a little... If you want to unmute, it's always nice to hear some applauses. So how about just unmuting yourself for just 1 second?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Therese, for that introduction. Now you can mute your microphones. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for all of you for being here this Friday afternoon, a beautiful afternoon. I know that you could be at the park, or going for a walk, but it is great that you're here to listen to my talk and to share our research. I remember about 9 or 10 years ago when I was chair, we had a cycle of presentations like this. This is something that I think is very healthy and productive for the department. That way we are all informed of what other colleagues and graduate students are doing, and it's also encouraging, to see what your peers are doing, and sometimes you walk out of here with ideas, with a lot of energy to maybe finish that article that has been sitting on your desk for a few weeks. So thank you for bringing this back, Therese, and thank you for being such a good leader for our department. I have a small PowerPoint presentation for you. And I'm going to share right now my screen. All right. And so now I want to do a slide from beginning, right? Yeah. So, Mario Vargas Llosa, the new novel by Mario Vargas Llosa, Hard Time, Alfaguara 2019, tells the story of the coup d'etat that occurred in Guatemala in 1954 to overthrow the government of Jacobo Arbenz. This is a very well-written novel, like all of Vargas Llosa's novels, but it does not present the structural narrative complexity that he has shown to handle in other novels, such as The Greenhouse from 1966 or Conversations in the Cathedral from 1969. This is a fairly linear novel where chapters of various length follow the narrative thread of the story without major digressions or narrative complexities, but nevertheless with an artistic and a skillful structure. In that sense, it is an easy-to-read novel, relatively simple in its language and aesthetics. It is not a novel that boasts narrative feasts, but rather wants to present a political and historical point, a particular point of view. Hard Times is a novel that wants to show that the government of Juan José Arévalo, 1945-1951, and the subsequent one of Jacobo Arbenz, 1951-1954, were not communist governments, but rather true democratic governments, interested in modernizing Guatemala, interested in developing strong and democratic institutions similar to those of the United States. Governments interested in improving the standard of living of indigenous Guatemalans, of the vast majority of poor Guatemalans without land, without access to education and health care, and that the United States made a serious mistake in supporting the interest of the United Fruit Company and a few landowners to the detriment of the great majority of Guatemalans. In this sense, we can say that Mario Vargas Llosa's novel is in line with the liberal thought expressed in several of his books of essays, particularly in The Call of the Tribe from 2018, where he defends the thinking of great liberals such as Adam Smith, José Ortega y Gasset, Friedrich Angus van Hayek, Sir Karl Popper, Raymond Aron, Sir Isaiah Berlin, and Jean-François Revel. Some critics have branded Vargas Llosa as a man of the right. Jeff Browett in his article from 2015, for example, or as having betrayed the cause of Latin America when he separated from the Cuban Revolution and began to criticize some leftist governments. Juan Castro, 2010. In my opinion, Hard Times show that this is not the case. It shows that Mario Vargas Llosa has a clear liberal thinking capable of criticizing and judging the positive things and progressive movements and governments, and the courage and strength of character to denounce the negative things these governments do. In that sense, I think he is one of the most balanced, courageous, and comprehensive intellectuals that Latin America has produced. Unlike many other populist writers who have spoken a lot about human rights and respect for individual freedoms, but who support repressive regimes where the freedom of movement of people is restricted, where the freedom of the press is violated, and where political prisoners are still held for years. The 1954 invasion of Guatemala has been presented by the United States and by some historians as a struggle within the context of the Cold War to prevent the settlement of Soviet communism in the American continent, or as an invasion motivated to defend the interest of the United Fruit Company, such as Juan Carlos in 1954, Gregorio Seltzer in 1954, and Nicholas Coulter in 1994, just to quote a few of those. Mario Vargas Llosa is widely known for his political ideas that some call conservative or neoliberal, while others consider them liberal or centrist. Starting in the late 60s, Vargas Llosa declared his opposition to socialism and international communism. He broke with the Cuban Revolution and since then has strongly criticized Cuba, Chavismo in Venezuela, Ortega in Nicaragua, Evo Morales in Bolivia, and more recently, the government of López Obrador in Mexico. In hard times, Vargas Llosa is proposing that the United States betray its own principle of democracy, the very essence of its way of governing, by overthrowing the government of Jacobo Arbenz. In this way, Vargas Llosa is proven to be consistent with his liberal and democratic thinking, defending the democratically elected government of Juan José Arevalo and Jacobo Arbenz. Now, if the novel has a political purpose and wants to demonstrate the hypothesis, we are faced with what in the Spanish literary tradition we call a novel of thesis, una novela de tesis, a novel where the main objective is to present a political position and not perhaps to create a major work of art that in some way changes the course of a Spanish-American narrative, like he did with The Green House. The long intellectual career of Mario Vargas Llosa has shown not only his great narrative capacity, but also his impressive intellectual honesty, although sometimes he has been wrong in his views. As Sara Castro Claren has said, the artist has wrestled publicly and openly with the possibility of creating for himself an aesthetic capable of critically justifying, if not explaining, his own work and its evolution, from the socially committed novel to the satire of the victims of a racist and obscurantist system. End of quote. The authorial point of view or the author's intention has been a highly debated topic in our discipline, with ups and downs at different times in history. Ever since Wolfgang Goethe proposed the concept of author or artist's intention, it has been discredited by William K. Wimsatt and Monroe Bursley in their 1946 article, The Intentional Fallacy. I am not going to discuss this long and thorny issue here due to lack of time, but I will make it clear that my position follows the model proposed by Umberto Eco in The Limits of Interpretation, where he rethinks the classic hermeneutical triangle under which we consider the intentio autoris, the intentio operis, and the intentio lectoris. That is to say, we cannot base our interpretation on a single angle of intentions, but we must consider all three planes to obtain a critical and balanced interpretation of the text. In this article, I consider all three intentions as guides for my analysis, but I am hypothesizing on Mario Vargas Llosa's political intention when writing Hard Times. The opening chapter of the novel is dedicated to the United Fruit Company and its founder, Sam Samurai, perhaps the most powerful man in Central America during the 20th century. Samurai was a very controversial figure who controlled ports, railways, huge banana plantations, and banks. A man who had the power to appoint and dismiss politicians and presidents. This section narrates Samurai's friendship with Edward L. Benyards, whom Samurai hired as a publicist to change the image of the United Fruit Company in the United States and in the rest of the world. All that initial chapter is historical information. It's a kind of introduction under the title Before, and serves as the portal of the novel. Next come to the first chapter, where we go directly into the fiction. Here we learn the story of a woman we are going to know as Miss Guatemala, and whose full name is Martita Borrero Parra. Martita is a relatively normal and happy girl at the beginning of the novel. Then she's a young woman with whom her father's best friend, Dr. Efren Garcia Ardiles, 28 years older than her, falls in love and gets pregnant, and with whom she is later married. Next, she is a mature woman who has many relationships with politicians and powerful men, including Lieutenant Colonel Carlos Castillo Armas. And finally, she's an old woman who will close the novel in the last chapter with an interview with the real-life author, Mario Vargas Llosa. This ending, or colophon, will be entitled After, so that the novel begins with a before and ends with an after, and in the middle we have 32 chapters that make up the story of the North American invasion to Guatemala. Martita's relationship with Castillo Armas and with other powerful figures such as Rafael Leonidas Trujillo, dictator of Dominican Republic from 1930 to 1961. The character Martita is based on is a real Guatemalan woman, Gloria Bolaños Pons, although there are many differences between the two stories. Bolaños Pons had a relationship with Castillo Armas and was a candidate for mayor of Guatemala in 1978. She lived in Dominican Republic and had some friendship with Rafael Trujillo. And I understand that she still lives in Miami. And you can read some of her blog posts from 2013 and 2014. At another level, we can say that the novel is the story of the abuse of a woman, the abuse a woman suffers throughout her life at the hands of men, generally older men, in a position of power, who take advantage of a girl in the first case, then of an unprotected young woman at risk, and finally of a woman who feels in danger and has to trust the powerful man to protect her. In other words, the novel echoes the current discourse of the Me Too movement and the denunciation of abuses of power by men for sexual purposes. We can say, in that sense, that Hard Times is a very contemporary novel, very current. Mario Vargas Llosa deals with perhaps one of the most discussed and important topics of our times. Hard Times oscillates between these two themes: the nature of the invasion orchestrated by the United States and the CIA to Guatemala, and the violence exerted on women by powerful men. In a metonymical way, I will propose that these two forms of violence, in fact, are one and the same, since powerful men in Washington, D.C. did to Guatemala the same thing Dr. Garcia Ardiles did to Martita. Alan Dulles, the CIA director at the time, colluded with Sam Samurai to violate Guatemala's freedom, land, and self-determination, just as Johnny Aves Garcia committed rape while pretending to save Martita's life. In other words, the invasion of a country is like the unwanted penetration of a vagina. In the novel, Vargas Llosa